Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Liliana Fonseca, and I am a research associate at EPRC. I'd like to welcome you to this year's 7th EPRC webinar and the second for this autumn semester. We are delighted to be able to welcome you all from a bit all over Europe or the world today even, and hopefully for future webinars as well. Today, I'd like to welcome the speaker, Sébastien Bourdin, and his colleagues, so Gianluigi Coppola, Sergio De Stefanis, and Maria Cubara. They will discuss what are the impacts of cohesion policy on the trade-off between employment and productivity based on their recent paper. The presentation will last between 20 to 30 minutes, followed by a discussion. And in the remaining time, we will open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. If you would like to make an intervention, use the Zoom raise a hand function, which you might already know by heart now. It's at the bottom of your screen, or you can feel free to also use the chat function. And after the presentation, we will address any comments in the Q&A. And before introducing our speaker, I would just like to inform you that this meeting is being recorded, which means that you and your colleagues will have the opportunity to follow the meeting at a later stage. And the recording will then be made available on our YouTube channel, and it will be shared with you by email. So if you can as well, of course, we'd like to encourage you to use Twitter to share your thoughts on the webinar and the research that our speakers will present today. So I will introduce Sébastien. Sébastien is professor in economic geography at EM Normandie Business School. He holds a PhD in geography and an accreditation to supervise research, and he specializes in the study of the European Union and issues related to cohesion policy, territorial development, public policies evaluation, and ecological transition. In his research, he uniquely combines quantitative methods such as spatial econometrics, statistics and modeling, and qualitative methods as well to provide an in-depth perspective on these topics. So Sébastien Bourdin has led also several notable research projects on current topics such as the energy transition and the circular economy. So you can also contact him about those. I will now ask for my colleague to stop sharing the screen so that Sébastien can go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I'm going to share my screen. Just tell me if you see my screen. Is it okay?
Yes, it is.
Yes, perfect. So as you mentioned, it is a joint paper with my colleagues from Poland and Italy. And the idea of this paper is to evaluate the impact of the EU cohesion policy on the trade-off between employment and productivity. So basically, I will present the literature review and why we decided to work on this topic. And then I will present very briefly some stylist facts, and then I will present the methodology, the main result, and finally the conclusion. So first of all, about the motivations and the literature review, let's say that in 2000, European leaders launched the Lisbon strategy to boost the economic growth and employment in European Union. And the stated aim of this Lisbon strategy was to make Europe the most competitive and dynamic economy in the world. And by 2010, by investing in research and development, improving worker skills, and so on and so forth. You know very well this strategy. But the results of this strategy were quite mixed. And although some progress was made, the European Union's overall goal was not completely achieved. And there are a lot of papers that are demonstrated this. And to replace this Lisbon strategy in 2020, a new strategy has been implemented, and it was adopted in 2010, but the idea was to have as a target 2020. And again, the aim was to boost the economic growth and the job creation in Europe, but as well, we can say that some results have fallen short regarding the targets set. In policy terms, the catching up requires stimulating employment growth and productivity growth or both. And the idea and the objective of this paper was to analyze whether this cohesion policy is stimulating employment growth, productivity growth, or both, knowing that there is probably a trade-off between both regarding the literature in macroeconomics that has highlighted that it exists a productivity a trade-off between, the labor productivity and the employment. And because there is a trade-off, our hypothesis is that it can explain why the EU cohesion policy has not the results expected systematically. And when you look at this cohesion policy and the different funds that cover this cohesion policy, you have the ERDF, and this European Regional Development Fund are primarily supporting enterprise companies, competitiveness, so they are prioritizing productivity. And on the other hand, you have the European Social Fund that is promoting the labor market policies. And thus, we can expect that this ESF is prioritizing the employment over productivity. So again, in this cohesion policy, you can see that there is a trade-off in the way they are promoting either productivity or employment regarding the different types of funds. And again, there are many papers that has already highlighted that these European structural funds are good to promote the regional growth, but sometimes the results are mixed. And the literature that is very vast has highlighted that there are certain determinants that can affect this effectiveness of the European funds. So I'm not going into detail, but just to mention the quality of institutions, the level of infrastructures, endowments, and some colleagues has already mentioned that there is an existence of spatial spillovers effects that can affect the effectiveness, and also a spatial heterogeneity of the effectiveness of the cohesion policy, meaning that in some regions, the effect is bigger than in other regions, even if the amount of money is the same in the two regions. So you know already this literature. So basically, the idea of our paper is to decompose the GDP per capita into the GDP per employee and the employment rate, and to analyze this this trade-off. And yes, of course, the production can be seen as the product of employment and productivity. And when you look at the literature, there are two main ways of achieving a certain level of production, either with high productivity and low employment, or with a low employment intensity and a high productivity. And the crucial question is whether the cohesion funds must increase the productivity, must target the productivity increase, or must target the employment growth. And when we look at the literature, you have various studies that have shown that this negative relationship between high productivity and low employment is not systematic. And for example, you have literature in macroeconomics that is saying that when you invest in the workforce training and skill development, it can increase the productivity without reducing the employment. And several researchers have shown that when employment growth is driven by low-skilled, low-paid jobs, this does not necessarily lead to higher productivity. So therefore, what we can say is that the training human capital may be a solution to ensure that productivity growth does not occur at the expense of employment growth. So when you look at the macroeconomic literature, there is a trade-off, but this trade-off is not systematic. So, as I mentioned before, the idea is to decompose the EU funds, knowing that they are prioritizing different types of supports, like labor market, so employment, or enterprises and investment, so the productivity. Regarding the theoretical framework, so we analyzed the employment productivity paradox. And in this paradox, as I just mentioned before, this trade-off is not systematic, and sometimes it exists some policies that can promote both employment and productivity, and that are at the end fostering the production. So basically, what we also reviewed in our literature is that it exists some labor-intensive industries where there is high employment, but often lower productivity. And it exists as well capital-intensive industries where there is a higher productivity and often fewer jobs. And regarding what I say is that at the end of the day, there is a policy conundrum. So it means that the labor-intensive policies in developing regions can result in rapid employment, but may hinder productivity growth. So it can contradict the goals of sustainable economic development, as mentioned by Maria Abreu. And in the context of the cohesion policy, this trade-off has direct implications for the EU's cohesion policy, which aims for both higher regional growth and employment. So this is the reason why we decided to work on this topic. And when you look at the OECD report, according to the OECD, the driving force behind growth is the worldwide economy of the worldwide economy. Is the productivity. So the OECD is trying to push the productivity as a main driver, but we can also say that employment can as well be a driver. And consequently, improving productivity, if we want only to improve productivity, it will be essential to improve growth, but it can hamper the employment growth. So this raises for sure the question of the role of public policies in impacting both employment and productivity. As I said quite before, there is also a spatial heterogeneity of the impact of cohesion policy on regional growth. And when you consider the GDP per employee and employment rate, you can imagine that due to the varying initial conditions, institutional quality, human capital, and the regional spillover effect across regions, all these initial conditions and the spatial spillovers can affect the impact of the cohesion policy on both GDP per employee and employment rate. And we are arguing that some regions may specialize in high productivity sectors like technology, while others might be focused on labor-intensive industries. And you have also regions with highly skilled workforce that may experience different trade-offs compared to areas with lower skilled workers. So again, we thought in our paper that it was very important to consider this spatial heterogeneity. Furthermore, regarding the spatial spillovers effect, A large part of the literature is using spatial econometrics models and has already demonstrated that there are some evidence about the sign and the magnitude of these spillovers, and these spillovers and this sign and magnitude remains very mixed. And if we apply this type of results to our topic, we can say that regions with high productivity may share resources, knowledge, and innovations with neighboring regions, so potentially boosting both employment and productivity. But we can also imagine that regions with high employment but low productivity may serve as labor pools for more productive neighboring regions. So this is why this question is quite complex, and we try in our paper to answer to some main question, and we try to identify the role of the various EU funds like the ERFD, EFS, and the cohesion funds, and we try to separate the GDP per employee and the employment rate. And we try to evaluate if there is or not a negative relationship between these both. And we consider in our method the role of spillovers effects and the spatial heterogeneity. So basically, we posit that the various EU regional policy funds are likely to have differentiated effects on productivity, productivity employment trade-off due to their distinct objectives. And we also posit that the spatial heterogeneity exists and has an impact on the cohesion policy on regional growth when we consider the GDP per employee and the employment rate. So to do so, we estimate the impact of cohesion policy funds with a Solovian growth model using different spatial econometrics models. So for this paper, for this presentation, I will only show you the SAR model. And then using a recent methodology that has been developed by my colleagues, my Italian colleagues, we estimate a multi-input, multi-output distance function, and we jointly consider the impact of policies on GDP per employee and employment rate. And we consider as well various spatial regimes that I will present just after. So is there a trade-off? Just two graphs, two figures to answer this question. If you look at this graph, you can say that there is no trade-off because there is no relation. We don't know very well. But if we control for the GDP growth, here you can see that there is a trade-off between GDP per employee and employment rate. And this is the reason why it was very important to analyze this trade-off. So regarding the methodology now, so we use the GDP per capita, the population, the employment, and the investment, and we use different types of EU funds. So as I mentioned before, the cohesion fund, the ERDF, the ESF, and we control for some other variables. So we consider the NUTS2, and as we were working on with spatial models, we removed UK and as well Cyprus, the Canary Islands, the Azores, and Madeira. And we analyzed the, we have a panel data from 2000 to 2018. And regarding the empirical strategy, so the baseline is a Solovian model. So it's a, let's say, a typical model. So I'm not going to develop it. It's a very typical. But what we wanted to mention here is that if we just regress the GDP per capita on funds and other variables, it could neglect the different influence of policies on GDP and on the components of the GDP, so the GDP per employee and the employment rate. And equally, if we just regress the GDP per employee and employment rate separately on phones and other variables, it could neglect that these variables are jointly determined. So another problem here in the modeling of these relations is that if we solely are regressing GDP per employee or the employment rate on phones separately, it overlooks both the impact of funds and on the other variable of interest and the influence of the other variable of interest on the variable being analyzed. And we identify as well other problems. So as GDP per employee and employment rate are likely determined together, there is a correlation between them. So we should not be, this should not be ignored. And including the employment rate in an equation for GDP per employee or vice versa, along with other regressors, would not sufficiently model this relationship between, because it implicitly assumes that GDP per employee is unaffected by funds. So for all these reasons, we, my Italian colleagues, developed a modeling strategy that can take into account all these problems of modeling if we were just using a Solovian model. So this is the reason why they developed a multi-output, multi-input transformation function. So the idea of this type of multi-output, multi-input function is to model the relationship between GDP per employee, employment rate, and the other variables. So J and R are respectively the GDP per employee and employment rate. And then you have the other regressors, including the funds. But here, the idea was to add like a further twist, let's say. So we considered an augmented version of the interaction term between cohesion funds and employment rate, normalized by the GDP per employee. And also using this equation, we can see whether policy funds have a stronger impact on either GDP per employee or employment rate. And for the sake of simplicity, we work on this simplified version of the model. And we include only GDP per employee, employment rate, and policy funds for the modeling strategy. And basically, in our strategy, the idea is that funds favor the employment rate, and in the sense that a higher A52 increases the long-term impact of funds on this rate, and dampens the long-run impact of funds on GDP per employee. So it has been shown in the literature that there is an economic growth. If there is an economic growth of a given region, it can also be influenced by the relative location. And this is the reason why we consider the spatial heterogeneity, and we also consider spatial dependence in our model. And as I mentioned before, we use here a SAR model, but we tested also other models. So for the spatial heterogeneity, we consider the blue banana area, the Central and Eastern European countries, and the cohesion fund countries. So I'm not going into the details of all the results. We also consider as alternative spatial regimes the objective ones and the objective two. I'm just going to present some tables. So just as a spoiler, there is indeed a negative relationship between GDP per employee and the employment rate. But the EU funds impact on GDP per employee and employment rate can be different. And there is definitely a strong heterogeneity when we consider the different spatial regimes. And there is some evidence of food-induced biases. And there is also some evidence of spatial spillovers effect. So here are some results. I'm going to help you to read this table. So just to let us recall that if we observe a positive sign, it means that a regressor has a positive impact on both components of GDP per capita, so the productivity and the employment. And a positive sign for the interaction means that the regressors are favoring employment over productivity. So in the equation 3, you have the equation that is representing the interactions between the productivity and the employment. So basically, if we read this table, you can see that if we consider the whole sample, ERDF emerges as a significant influence on only if, ERDF emerges as a significant influence only if its interaction terms are considered. So it means that the ERDF appears to have a bias in favor of labor productivity, while it may be even detrimental to employment. So it makes sense because this type of ERDF are targeted to have a better access to the market, to reduce the cost for businesses, to improve the overall efficiency of the companies, and to contribute to higher productivity. So our results are quite consistent. If you look at the cohesion foods, it has a positive impact on the 3 equations. And if you look at the model 3, the equation 3, we can say that this result is confirming that the cohesion foods are very prominent and are playing an important role in the lagging regions. But as the sign is positive for the interaction terms, it means that there is a bias of the cohesion funds in favor of employment rather than productivity, which is an interesting result, we think. And when you look at the ESF here, it is also significant only for when you introduce the interaction term, so the column 3. And in this case, there is a bias in favor of employment over labor productivity. So indeed, of course, it is expected. The SF is primarily aimed at improving the employment opportunities by financing projects that create new jobs, that help maintain existing ones. So basically, it can explain why this sign is positive. And let's move to another table, for example, the Central European and Eastern countries. So here, if you look at the Central and Eastern regions, what we can say is that we observe that the role of cohesion policy is again important. But there is no any bias towards either employment or labor productivity. So this result can be compatible with the recent study of my colleague Sergio in 2023. And when you look at, for example, this table, you can also see that there are some evidence of a positive impact of ERDF on the GDP per capita and the negative impact of ESF on the GDP as well. So just to sum up and to be on time, what we can say is that the aim of this paper was to examine the heterogeneous effectiveness of EU cohesion policy in fostering regional GDP per capita, considering this trade-off between productivity improvement and job creation, and the role of the cohesion funds in promoting regional growth in lagging regions is confirmed. while the ERDF and ESF exhibit different impacts on regional development depending on the spatial regime that has been used. And in general, what we can say is that the ERDF tends to enhance productivity, whereas the ESF favors employment over productivity, which is, again, consistent with the literature, but asks questions, of course, about how to enhance or invest in regions. Should we invest in employment or in productivity to improve the overall production? And this is the reason why we are calling for more we are calling for more tailor-made cohesion policy that is taking into account the regional specificities. For some regions, as we mentioned before, they are more intense in productivity and some are more intense in terms of labor. So we need to take into account all this. And these differences highlight, at the end of the day, that the necessity of balancing investment in infrastructure, the business environment, the competitiveness, but also the human capital in achieving sustainable regional growth. And what we can also say is that while an immediate productivity gains may not always be evident, investing in human capital can create a skilled workforce that contributes to long-term productivity enhancement. And we also show that in our paper. So that's all. I think that we are quite on time. So if you have a question, do not hesitate. I don't know if Sergio, our colleague from
I don't believe
Italy.
Sergio is logged in, but either way, thank you so much for your presentation, Sebastian. That was really interesting. And as you can see, it called quite a crowd to the seminar. Actually, we have a question that came to us by email and I don't believe the speaker, well, the person who posed the question is here. So I'll just pose the question for them to open the Q&A, and then we can move on to other questions. So you can start jotting them down. But yes, so this question came from Tilman Heidelk, and he asked, well, he said an interesting aspect for him would be to understand from the researcher's perspective, which lessons learned do you take from any data analysis? And in particular, which challenges have been encountered, how they have been resolved, and how would you improve data quality going forward with a particular focus on the spatial granularity?
Hope. Thank you very much for this question. This is obviously a question that is taking a lot of time when we are meeting with other colleagues and when we are talking about this issue, because it's a very important issue. The issue of the data is fundamental. Here we have an advantage with the EU Cohesion Policy portal, because now all the researchers have an access to this portal, and we can download very easily all the structural funds and so on for each year, and separated between ERDF and ESF. So I would say that if I would have to answer to this question, let's say 6 or 7 years ago, I say that we really struggled to gather all this data, but now it was quite easy to gather this data. And regarding the size, we consider the level, so we consider the NUTS2 level, which makes sense because it is at this regional level that the EU funds are distributed and are managed. But we are considering for the future to go into more details, and for example to go at the NUTS3 level which is very interesting because some new papers as in the literature has considered this NUTS3 level, because the advantage of including this NUTS3 level, it is that we can consider more the spatial heterogeneity, and we also can consider more and the spatial spillovers effect for sure, because we are in a granularity that is more fine.
Thank you. That was quite thorough response. I wondered if there was any other responses from your group or anyone from the audience that wants to pose more questions. You can feel free to unmute yourself or also raise your hand, ask a question in the chat.
Sergio has joined us. Hello, Sergio.
Yes. We have a question from Lucien. Yes, you can unmute yourself, Lucien.
Just a second, can you hear me? I'm trying to launch the camera, but I don't know if anything is showing. I have two cameras and apparently none of them are working.
So we can hear you and you can see you.
Okay. Thanks a lot for the answer to the previous question. It was actually my colleague who was asking the question, so I'm gonna tell him your answer. So I'm Lucian Luca. I work at the European Commission in the same unit as my colleague Tillman. So in DG Regio, in charge of the ERDF part, let's say, on the monitoring part, at least the data and the open data platform. So it was very interesting. One of the conclusions you had, or suggestions, or I don't know how to call it, on a more tailor-made cohesion policy, right? With basically more flexibility according to regions and types of regions and so on. Isn't there a risk? I'm just trying to see the implications of this. Wouldn't there be a risk of even more divergence between the regions? So we already have quite mixed progress, let's say, from the regions, and the whole purpose of cohesion policy is to try to keep them in the same pace, let's say, of development or catching up. While if there's more flexibility, there's of course more risk of higher inequality between the development of the regions. Would you see that, or is that something that's unfounded fear?
Well, when you know, there are most of the conclusions of the last paper that has been published on cohesion policy are saying that we must we must address, or we must implement more, let's say, place-based or place-sensitive policies to reduce the regional disparities and to promote equal opportunities for all. But from my point of view, the question of the and we demonstrated in the paper, so we hope that this paper will be published very soon. But if this paper is published, you will see all the results in details, and we definitely think that sometimes there is a misallocation of resources. So it means that if funds are not allocated efficiently, either on trying to enhance the employment or the productivity, the regional growth can be hampered, and at the end of the day, we can expect less production than if the funds were well allocated, either on employment or on productivity. And for that, we need to analyze in details the initial conditions of the region, and some are more needed, more productivity, let's say productivity growth, and others are more needing let's say, employment growth. So, of course, if you use policy that is successful in one region, but not necessarily be successful in another due to differences in local conditions, and if there is a lack of, let's say, customization of the cohesion policy, it can affect the regional growth and overall the regional disparities. And what we have demonstrated here is also that when you look, I didn't show this table, but we consider only, let's say, the developed countries and the developed regions. And the results are very interesting because, Sergio, maybe you can show the results, the table. I don't know if you have the table with you, to show the table regarding the developed countries, the blue banana.
Yes, I will. I think I can do it. So let me get the right page.
Because the results are very interesting, and it can answer to your question about the if we implement this type of tailor targeted policies, it can increase the divergence. The blue, just before the blue, yeah.
Yes, sorry. I'm not sure whether you can see it.
It's okay, we can see. We can see it. Yeah.
I can do better, I think. Just a moment. Okay. This should be. Can you see it?
Yes.
Now? Better. Okay, excellent. This is the blue banana.
So can you explain the results, for example, for this table?
Yes.
I think it's very interesting to answer to the question.
Yes. So basically here we see that there is some impact of the policies, but actually this does not overrule the fact that the main impact of the policies is actually for the other regions, like especially the Objective 1 regions. So we think that a better allocation of funds would not increase per se the initial disparities between regions. What may be a problem lies in two aspects linked to the capability of the various regions to manage funds. So there is a projecting phase which is carried out mostly at Brussels, and my knowledge of the matter is that mostly Southern European countries do not attend much this projecting phase in Brussels, which they should do and which they would do if they had more capability of management. And when the funds have been allocated, and I agree completely with Sébastien that the allocation should be somehow tailor-made, needs-based or place-based. Once they've been allocated, to some extent, the developed regions are still more capable to manage these funds than the more disadvantaged regions. And so this is a gap that should be addressed. But you see, for example, here that the ERDF is significant in the northwestern regions, which are basically the North Banana regions, but for Italy. If we add Italy, we have less significance of the ERDF because there is less managing capability in Italy. So this is the really big issue. Not so much the tailor-madedness of the funds, but the fact that after they've been tailor-made, some regions are able to make the best of these funds and some other regions aren't. And on the other hand, you see that even if Northwestern Europe regions are capable to get advantage of a high effectiveness of the ERDF, still there is a high capability also of the Eastern European regions, and especially of the Objective 1 regions, to get advantage of these funds as well. So basically, the main idea is to be able to address the managing capability problem in some regions rather than the place-basedness, if I may say so, of the policies. This is certainly a path which, in my opinion, too, should be pursued. What should be monitored and also strengthened forcefully is the managing capability of the regions. And usually this is thought out in terms of capability to spend funds. This is a kind of reductive notions. And I stress that it should be a very important matter if the Southern European regions were to attend more forcefully the meetings in Brussels at the projecting phase of a programming cycles, which they don't do nowadays. I don't know, Lucian, if this answers your question.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It does. But I had the feeling that there was a slight different message between you and Sébastien on the tailoring versus administrative capacity, and maybe maybe we can discuss more about this next week at the seminar. We also have a seminar on the evaluation of SME competitiveness, but this is all very interesting. So thanks a lot. I don't want to take over now. I leave it for the others if they have any questions. But thanks a lot, Sébastien and Sergio, for the answers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. That was quite enlightening. And I wonder if there's anyone else from the audience now who would like to come in with a question. If not, I also have one of my own. Martin, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, thanks very much for the presentation. I think that was really informative, and the research sounds really interesting. It kind of follows up a little bit on the previous exchange, where you've gathered data from 2000 to 2018.
Yes.
And there's obviously an argument in the literature that in Central Eastern Europe and other regions, capacity has built over time gradually, as with experience. And I'm just wondering if there's scope to look at the data in terms of a sort of an evolution of these sort of relationships that you talk about. I mean, they now have experience of 2.5 program periods, and to see if these sort of relationships between the funds and the impacts are changing, because that could be a way of saying, yes, capacity is developing.
Sergio, you want to answer? Yeah, absolutely. Sergio, yeah. But I definitely agree with you. It's definitely, yeah.
I also agree. It is a very important suggestion. And as obviously must have been made clear by Sébastien, we already have a novel estimation procedure, heterogeneity to take into account, spillovers that we want to model, and this makes a whole set of issues that are quite difficult to fit in a single paper. And in future work, it does. I'm sure that you also realize that, Sébastien, preparing the various talks that you have been giving about the paper. And certainly this issue of capacity building throughout time is very important. In principle, our methodology enables us to do that, but I personally would like to do that at a later stage in a later paper. I heard Sébastien saying previously that the extension to NUTS 3 is important, and I fully agree with that. The extension to separate time periods is also very important. And however, we would like to do it in future work. Obviously, there is this very big problem of the break in the data in 2020, which large breaks like this one usually do not very much agree with econometrics. So let's see what we can do, because at the end of the day, we would have still only 2 more years, or even 1 more year, which is useful in the immediate future. But definitely the point is very important, and we happily make a note about it.
Thank you for the suggestion. Yeah.
Is there anyone else that would like to come in with a question at the moment, since we're finishing up on the hour? I might leave my own question. So I understand that you looked at the funds so more generally, but I wondered if there was also a perspective of in the future, at least not maybe for this paper or this type of research, but to look at particular instruments. So for example, when we consider now there's smart specialization, there is the I3 instrument, there's new instruments that also focus on more interregional cooperation. So I wondered if there was something also you were going to potentially compare in the future in terms of their effects.
I would say why not? We didn't consider yet these suggestions, but I think that, as I mentioned before, as we get a lot of data now, and we have the most recent data, and there are different instruments that can be considered by using the same methodology. We can definitely work on this type of specific instruments to assess the extent to which they are, let's say, efficient and yes, efficient. Question of allocation of resource again.
Yes.
I understand it's not the research for now, but yes, Sergio, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
No, if I may just make some very small and unashamed plugging of another paper in this circumstance. To some extent, I address this issue into this presentation here, into this paper, which is not with Sébastien, Maria, and Gianluigi, but if you can see the slides, there is this last paper which just came out in Structural Change and Economic Dynamics, and here we do, after prompting from one referee, we take smart specialization into account somehow, not directly, but through the interactions between funds. So basically, one big point about smart specialization is that funds should not be used one by one, but in combination, and that the project should involve joint programming of two funds, typically the European Social Fund and the European Regional Development Fund. And we do find some sign of positive interaction between these funds, which of course is a preliminary result. And again, we did it under prompting of the referee, which means that you know, still there is much to be done in the future about that. But for anybody who was interested, including, of course, you, this paper, which is called Investment, Innovation Activities and Employment Across European Regions, may be of interest because we do take these interactions into account.
Thank you very much, Sergio. That is something we can also share. If you want, we can share it with the people that have registered by email so that everyone can.
This is, yes, certainly I will send this. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have 5 minutes. If there's still anyone else that'd like to join, this is your last call. If not, then I will just say thank you very much, Sébastien, and thank you very much, Luigi, Sergio, and of course the colleagues. I would like to say that it was a pleasure to have you, and of course you're always welcome to present your research, and of course thank you to everyone for your interest in today's webinar as well. Our next webinar will be on December 13th. When Maria Varinia Michelon from the OECD will discuss administrative capacity building and trust. So it follows up quite nicely from today's topic. So if you are interested in registering, you can contact us, or you can also keep an eye out on our social media for more information for registration. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day and rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.